Hey guys, just want to give you a quick update on the situation with the Omicron COVID virus. There is new data coming out of South Africa. There's also data coming out of Sweden that we'll be touching on today. The first study is this preprint. So this is preliminary data. It's not been peer reviewed, but it's considered to be important enough, and the methodology is solid enough, in my opinion, that we can safely look at it and draw some conclusion. It comes from one of the most reputable labs in South Africa, led by Alex Segal. You can find him on Twitter. Anyways, he's looked at the blood samples for 12 people, and he's been able to test those on a line of human cells and see whether the serum from these people provided any protection against the Omicron variant or not. Because the whole question here that we've been waiting for is whether having prior infection with COVID-19 or having been immunized before or having had both, how much protection can we count on against the Omicron variant? And this is the first study that looked at that issue and provides some hardcore numbers that we can look at. It's looked at a total of 12 participants. Half of those were vaccinated. Half of them have had both infection and vaccination before. See here. So it's an interesting mix of people. For some reason, they had more women than men, and that could be a problem potentially. Also important to notice here, in the vaccinated people, the average time between the vaccination and the time they did this test was quite small, 10 to 39 days. So we're not talking about a huge amount of time post-vaccination. We're talking about, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, a little bit over a month. If we compare the original COVID-19 variant, this D614G, and the degree of protection, over here is basically the degree of protection that these people displayed against that ancestral strain, whether we are talking about, in green color here, people who both had the infection and got vaccinated, or in red, people who only got the vaccine, we see a significant drop between the protection against the ancestral strain and Omicron. Everything goes down, as you see, on a fairly steep slope. The number two interesting thing is people who had infection, 5 out of 6, there's just one here that drops below this dotted red line. But all people who had both the infection and the vaccine are higher up. See all these green lines here? That means that the protection you get from having the infection and vaccination is notably higher and better even for Omicron than if you only had the vaccine alone. And the degree of drop, the ratio here is about 41 times, meaning that the protection that these antibodies, whether from infection plus vaccine or from vaccine alone, if you compare the protection that you have against the original variant versus the Omicron, you see a 41 times drop in protection. That's a pretty steep, massive drop. However, having said that, the researchers, and I agree with them, there is an optimistic note to this. While the drop is significant, it doesn't go down all the way to zero, except for a minority of cases. You still enjoy a certain degree of protection here, which is, I think, remarkable, important to remember. And I think this is the main takeaway home that I think I would take from this study. Again, this is a preliminary, early study. We will have to see what comes next. And in fact, I'll show you a second one in a moment here. But I want you to remember this number. And also, while this looks a bit scary, I think it's important to remember the fact that with some exceptions, there is still protection from the vaccine, or even better, from the vaccine and infection against the Omicron, and this is better than most people expected. This is better. So this is great news at the end of the day, no matter how bad it looks here. The other thing I wanted to show you here briefly is data from another lab, from another place in the world. This is in Sweden, I think is the Karolinska Institute. And over there, they had another researcher, Ben Morel is his name. This is a screen grab from his Twitter account here. You can find him on Twitter too. And what he has done in his lab there with his helpers, and they just published this today also, is they also looked at the wild variant, at Delta, and at Omicron, and they plotted for a number of, I believe it was 17 samples or somewhere around there, to see the degree of protection, similar to what they did in South Africa, to compare between these things. And while you see a better level of protection, the higher on this line against the wild type, Delta came down, Omicron came further down, but there's still protection there, so it tells the same story. Moreover, in this particular study, the difference between the wild type and the Omicron here, it's only 7 times drop as opposed to 41 times in the other studies. So how do we make sense of the 41 versus 7 times drop in protection? Which one is right? We don't know. I think there are some significant differences between these two studies. The guys in Sweden have used a pseudovirus, not a live virus. So it's a bit further in methodology than real world. In South Africa, they have actually used a live strain of Omicron to do these studies. There's also obviously differences in population and vaccination status, time from vaccination between Sweden and South Africa. So that's another thing to keep in mind and remember. There is also the issue of boosters. Remember, in South Africa, from what I understand from the study, they are talking only about people who are fully vaccinated, but in recent time, it's true, but just with the first series. We're not talking about the booster yet. Whereas in Sweden, it's possible that what we see, and the reason why we see such a significant difference, it's possible, there could be other reasons for sure, but one could be that in Sweden we have the effect of boosters, and we know that the immunity after booster is not only much more powerful, but it's also much more diverse, much more encompassing when it comes to covering for variants, because just like the virus undergoes mutations and new strains come around, our body does not sit idle. The immune system is designed when it, especially with a booster shot, when it puts out another antibody response to the same virus that was encountered months ago, the immune system is designed in such a way that it anticipates potential future variants that the virus may develop. And in that way, we can have a better protection. I think, at least in part, like I said, this better ratio here is accounted potentially by the booster shots. We'll have to see. Again, these are all preliminary results, but overall, I think this is good news. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is that we are talking primarily of neutralizing antibodies in these studies, okay? And we see this 41 versus 7 drop or whatever it's going to be. Over the next few weeks, we'll find out more details about this. But let's remember, the immune system or the neutralizing antibodies are just one portion of the immune system. This doesn't look at the T cell response. It doesn't look at the natural killer cells and other things in the immune system. So we are only looking at a piece of the puzzle, as important as it is. And so the actual real world protection could be better than this, because we haven't, again, taken these things into account yet in these studies. So reality is even better than this good news, and that's even better news, I suppose, right? If you have any questions, feel free to post them. I'll try to reply as soon as I have a little time. I appreciate your participation to this, and you stay healthy, you stay wise, and let's hope for more good news on this front.